Well, tēnā koutou katoa, according to my clock, it's 4 p.m. and we are at our first series of streamed presentations for DHA 2021. And I'm really delighted to be able to chair this panel. I think it's going to be really interesting because we're going to have a mix of open scholarship and of tools that have been created to enhance digital humanities scholarship, and also an opportunity to sort of look at some of the challenges that libraries and archives face and also the possibilities there. So we'll jump straight in. We've got 3 papers and we are allowing 30 minutes per paper, which will be presentation plus some question time. And our first paper comes from Paul Arthur and Lydia Hearn. And Paul, as you'll see in his biography, is Vice-Chancellor, Professorial Research Fellow and Chair in Digital Humanities and Social Sciences at Edith Cowan University in Western Australia. And Paul's list of achievements is in his bio on the conference site. And in this paper, he's collaborating with Lydia, who has over 30 years of experience working on major international projects in health and community development. Much of that research being translated into policy and practice as she seeks to better understand and find sustainable solutions to the challenges facing the 21st century, with the goal to renew and reinforce universal principles of human dignity. She's an advocate of open access and open scholarship to make research more freely and easily accessible to the communities it serves. And Paul and Lydia's paper, which we're about to play, is called Open Scholarship to Engage Communities.
I'm very pleased to be able to present this paper on the topic of open scholarship to engage communities. In our digital world, unrestricted open access to knowledge and information is our society's most valuable resource. Openness in the scholarly environment, broadly referred to as open scholarship, is quickly becoming recognised as a fundamental principle. While most researchers are aware of open access, few fully understand the more extensive concept of open scholarship and how it can change the way knowledge is created, preserved and shared to better connect academics and communities together. Open scholarship encompasses open access publications, open data, open methods, open software, open educational resources, and all other forms of openness in the scholarly and research environment. Researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and engaged citizens can now almost instantly draw from, borrow, repurpose, and build on already developed research outputs, methods, and data. They can also check the credibility of this work by reviewing and scrutinising the study design, plan, data, and analysis that's available on an open platform. And as such, open scholarship provides opportunities for a more productive, universal design and use of knowledge, and for the opening of pathways for more equitable, inclusive access to knowledge and information focused on finding solutions to global problems and for sustainable development. I'm just going to share my screen now with you. Today, international policy directives are calling for open access to knowledge and new ideas, with research outputs to be presented in more findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable or fair ways, with the data more easily available for societal benefit. At the heart of open scholarship is the drive for greater equity of access to open data and support for citizen engagement through open access platforms and repositories to bridge the digital divide and realign the mission of universities to be engaged, inclusive knowledge societies. Yet the move toward open scholarship has encountered significant challenges. For international and national policy to be adopted effectively, we need to better understand the barriers limiting the uptake of open scholarship and the role stakeholders can play in overcoming these. Moreover, there's a need to review how digital humanities can better promote open scholarly communication. Although the movement towards open scholarship started in the 1990s, It was the Budapest Open Access Initiative in 2002 that represented the earliest international policies around openness in scholarly communication. Open access was defined as, quote, free availability on the public internet, permitting any users to read, download, copy, distribute, print, search, or link to the full texts of these articles, crawl them for indexing, pass them as data to software, or use them for any other lawful purpose without financial, legal, or technical barriers other than those inseparable from gaining access to the internet itself. This implied not just free access without payment, but included reuse rights, but also author attribution rights and permanent archiving for sustainable preservation. Yet over the last 20 years, as academic practices have become increasingly digital, opportunities have emerged to widen open access and reshape the tradition of scholars publishing research in closed print formats toward a future of more interactive, open communication and data sharing that reaches broader and more diverse publics. With the growing speed and depth of online information, however, international concerns have emerged around how best to foster collaborative exchanges of knowledge and new ideas among different communities, and to assure the widest dissemination, not just of research findings, but also of the basic sources of inquiry, especially research data. Today, as databases are becoming an essential part of the large-scale infrastructure for knowledge, global movements are progressively calling for the implementation of fair, that is, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable principles for the dissemination and translation of research to bridge the gap between makers and users of knowledge and information. The vision for open scholarship now extends beyond the principle of open access to an interconnected, equitable, global scholarly ecosystem of well-curated, interoperable, trusted research articles, data and software supported by a diversity of open publishing models. And that's a quote from the Australasian Open Access Strategy Group. Despite the positive rhetoric about open scholarship, the growing impetus of government and funding agencies and the work of groups like Open Access Australasia, in practice, the movement toward open scholarship has encountered significant barriers. In Australia, universities and research institutes are increasingly hard-pressed to sustain open access to publicly funded research as journal, monograph, and digital scholarship costs continue to rise. The academic sector, including researchers, administrators, and library and information technology specialists, is voicing concerns about the lack of appropriate open scholarship infrastructure at the national and international level, and limited academic recognition for those who adopt or promote practices to make their research more readily accessible. All those involved in open scholarship struggle to implement progressive open access and open data policies in ways that meet the needs of users and stakeholders. At the 40th session of UNESCO's General Conference in 2019, representatives noted, driven by unprecedented advances in our digital world, the transition to open science allows scientific information, data, and outputs to be more widely accessible, it's open access, and more reliably harnessed, so open data, with the active engagement of all relevant stakeholders, that is, open to society. However, in the fragmented scientific and policy environment, a global understanding of the meaning, opportunities, and challenges of open science is still missing. And a key outcome of this conference was the launching of a global consultation process around potential future action based on lessons learned. And this resulted in the release this year of the UNESCO recommendation on open science that was developed with the support of the Open Scholarship Initiative. Despite the productive nature of this report, as the title illustrates, emphasis continues to be focused primarily on open science as opposed to the broader concept of open scholarship, which comprises all forms of research, including in the arts and humanities, or what is increasingly referred to as the open humanities. These terms require a more detailed analysis of the diverse processes and practices that surround the different disciplines and their research paradigms to develop a broader framework in which to embed open humanities rather than merely employing the same approaches used in open science. Yet what the recommendations do call for is the need to better understand current barriers that are limiting the uptake of open scholarship, especially in the humanities, and the role stakeholders can play in overcoming these. Despite the enormous amount of knowledge, energy and goodwill toward the establishment of frameworks with clear charters, collaborative networks, etc., in practice the open scholarship movement has encountered significant institutional, systemic, technological and financial barriers. At the institutional level, university and staff academic performance continues to be judged and funded according to a world ranking system based on the use of metrics focused on scholarly publication and citation analysis, with staff promotion and tenureship largely assessed according to research outputs through prestigious scholarly journals and book publishers, rather than through collaborative group accomplishments and open research for societal benefit. Moreover, the financial costs imposed by large for-profit publishers to make research outcomes openly available, and the lack of incentives offered by universities for open research has resulted in an inertia among many researchers to adopt more open, efficient and equitable ways to engage the broader public in the development, dissemination and uptake of their research. Thus, while emerging digital platforms are offering new spaces for open research practices, the complexity of the academic system, the lack of financial incentives to support open scholarship, the fragmented and siloed nature of open initiatives, and limited advocacy have hampered the move toward a more engaged and open, inclusive research culture by university leaders. At the policy and operational level, the environment is becoming more fragmented as new software is added to support data management and curation, leading to a need for sector-wide standards for metadata, protocols and language to ensure interoperability of systems. And all too often, these schemas have been produced primarily in isolation with their focus on research disciplines and lacking the engagement of key stakeholders and users, limiting the progress of innovative cross-sector solutions. Sharing of data is more complicated than sharing of articles in open digital repositories. In addition, limited financial support to develop, implement and maintain open access to research outputs and data, together with a lack of trained staff to promote the uptake of open access and scholarship, confusion around copyrights for printing and data sharing, and institutional concerns over the time and effort required to deposit outputs in repositories or platforms are continual problems. Of particular concern is the current disconnect between policy officers, funders, senior university administrators, researchers, university librarians, publishers and platform developers who all too often work in isolation, with their conceptual framework and approaches toward open scholarship and research being focused on a unified set of meanings and practices aligned with single fields of research or endeavour, limiting the progress of innovative cross-sector solutions, leaving many humanities researchers outside the process rather than participating in it. The open scholarship movement has focused on unrestricted free access to scholarly information for all, yet in practice this has taken various forms, gratis and libre, which has been linked with gold and green access. The green model is generally used by traditional journals and allows authors to make their publications freely available on an institutional repository, but after an embargo period. The gold model allows publications to be made freely available in their final format immediately, but here article processing charges, or APCs, and book processing charges, or BPCs, for open access are generally paid for by the author, the university or the research institute. These fees can be costly, representing as such a financial elitism that runs contrary to open scholarship. At the heart of open scholarship is the drive for greater equity of access to open data and support for citizen engagement through open access platforms and repositories to bridge the digital divide. Questions remain around whether the benefits of open scholarship can be truly democratic, unrestricted and fully inclusive. And how can we unlock access to data, information and knowledge to yield positive results for all, regardless of their socioeconomic, gender, geographical or cultural lines? How can we prevent furthering the inequality between and within communities and the global north-south divide? The question, open for whom, is essential, both to consider and to act upon. Whose interests are being prioritised in the actions we take and in the platforms that we support, and whose voices are excluded? While open scholarship is a global movement with the potential to provide substantial benefits for universities, businesses, government and non-government organisations across the world, it also involves a complex array of power relations that may not always be consistent with the goal of inclusive, equitable development. Today, universities are making incremental progress toward gender, socioeconomic and geographic inclusion, but their histories and those of learned societies too, as well as academic publishers, have been steeped in classical white male privileged norms. Advocates of open scholarship have tended to focus on the creation of digital platforms and tools to facilitate multiple forms of participation by diverse sets of actors, and have been considered neutral, inclusive and gender fair. And yet too often this knowledge infrastructure has in itself been framed and packaged according to the socio-political views of those who participate in its production. While many online spaces have facilitated user uptake and collaboration, limited attention has been given to redress the power relations and restructure the systems that stagnate and hinder innovation and creativity. To combat these practices, there's a growing call for those scholars, designers and promoters of technical tools and platforms to increase the participation of the user community in their planning and design to ensure the creation of more usable and inclusive and sustainable systems. Essential to this is gaining gender, geographic and socioeconomic and cultural inclusion representation in the framing and construction of these digital technologies. Inclusivity in the design, management and use of knowledge infrastructures is vital to ensure fairer participation in open scholarship. Only by embedding local knowledge in the design, management and execution of collaborative tools and techniques can steps be taken toward the reimagining of scholarly systems of openness through the use of architecture and standards appropriate to the communities they serve. The involvement of key groups in the groundwork for producing digital tools, platforms and networks is central to their success and sustainability. Greater dialogue around how best to counter prejudices through grounded practices is fundamental if openness is to represent a tool for social empowerment. Rather than viewing open access platforms as apolitical tools or suppliers of information, it's important to consider them from the demand side to allow for networking, sharing and repurposing between the specific needs of diverse communities. While these general barriers have affected all fields of research, the humanities have been notably slow to take advantage of open scholarship, due in part to the varied and multifaceted nature of research outputs, from books, manuscripts, maps, photographs, art, to news, entertainment, and many other kinds of texts, which often makes their preservation in open formats more costly and complex. Many working in more traditional or established areas of arts and humanities have argued that their research is grounded in detailed analysis of defined topical issues, for example, analysing historical or contemporary documents, which often require niche approaches and formats. And this may involve regional, national or language-specific communities and sensitivities to culture. Moreover, the humanities tend to use inductive approaches to gain a deeper understanding and subjective interpretation of reality as people see it to be, rather than the objectivity, reproducibility, replicability and generalizability of the sciences. This includes a wide range of content types, formats, metadata schemas and topologies. Humanities data can include data from primary or secondary sources that belong to museums or private entities. Collaboration, citizen engagement, crowdsourcing and social media can play a central role in humanities research. And unfortunately, research grants in the humanities tend to involve very small amounts of funding over a short period of time relative to the sciences, limiting their ability to build sustainable infrastructure for open access to data and methods or to adopt novel approaches for dissemination of findings. But to overcome these barriers, there's an urgent need for collaboration. Early and mid-career researchers who are the main producers and users of data can work with all stakeholders to ensure that data is made available in formats that are accessible, understandable, usable, and preservable. University leaders have a role to collaborate with scholarly societies, funding agencies, the ICT industry, and senior university committees, raising awareness of the global importance of new open infrastructure. Public and private funding agencies can and should financially support the design and maintenance of data infrastructure and can play a central role in the promotion of innovative formats for diverse community groups. Libraries and digital repositories can support and connect researchers with open resources to make their outputs and data freely available, providing, for example, persistent identifiers and descriptive metadata to preserve and sustain the data. The ICT industry and infrastructure groups can oversee the design of more navigable systems that ensure researchers have access to systems that can be made interoperable and open. Journal editors have a role to play in improving journal standards and in making available preprint and postprint versions of journal articles and other publications. Academic and commercial publishers can raise corporate social responsibility through greater collaboration with university committees, national policy officers, and funding agency directors. Open knowledge infrastructure and support groups like DARIA, Open Library of Humanities, and others can provide sustainable business models for open access to deliver content to communities in more diverse and open ways. Cultural heritage and GLAM groups can work closely with researchers to explore the benefits of open sharing of data so as to increase efficiencies reaching a broader public, while at the same time ensuring preservation of data for future reuse. Global entities like UNESCO and the World Intellectual Property Organization can work to improve open standards by introducing international law and regulations to unify access and improve copyright and IP regimes. And finally, community groups can play a role through active citizen participation in the entire process for the co-creation of knowledge. It's in this context that digital humanities can and should play a central role in building this collaboration by shifting the way knowledge can be created and shared between scholars, students, the public, and other aligned groups, including galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And here on this slide, I list a number of ways that they may be possible and ways forward. Yet, if the digital humanities research community is to play a leading role in advancing open scholarship, greater emphasis must be given to fostering rather coordinated efforts from all stakeholders. Today, change is being driven by national and international government policy, with the financial support of funding bodies like the Mellon Foundation and through the creation of open access publishing platforms. Many global networks and large-scale infrastructures include, for example, the Humanities Commons platform, DARIA and OPERA's, the EU-based Social Sciences and Humanities Network. Open publishing services such as the Open Library of the Humanities, Open Book Publishers, Open Humanities Press, Open Edition, Knowledge Unlatched, Ubiquity Press, and Language Science Press are developing new approaches to assist in covering the APC and BPC costs of open access. In addition to open publishing services, numerous bibliographic databases and digital platforms are also emerging. In the humanities, these include the long-established Social Sciences Research Network, the Centre for Open Science, and the highly recognised SILO, that is the Scientific Electronic Library Online Network, which has recently launched a preprint platform. Open repository aggregators of digital collections like Open Air in Europe, Share in the USA, and La Referencia in South America support the discovery of open research outputs. Open methods and open data platforms are also widening their reach to meet humanities scholars' needs. Cultural heritage and GLAM institutions are playing a key role in facilitating greater data fluidity through adopting novel technological and archival approaches, By reaching wider audiences, cultural heritage and GLAM institutions are championing the open sharing of cultural memory and social practices. These are in projects that are well known in our community, like the Venice Time Machine, building on an open digital archive of the city's cultural heritage of more than 1,000 years of evolution, and the Dutch Rijksmuseum, which provides digital images of objects from its collection and descriptive object information and bibliographic data from their data service without restrictions on reuse. Through this presentation, we've tried to illustrate that while the open scholarship movement has, over the last 2 decades, progressed globally, the digital humanities can and should play a central role in this. As digitisation increasingly becomes an everyday part of our research environment and an ongoing concern, the ability to access and interface with deeper layers, stores, and flows of digital data and research outputs will have significant impact for the arts and humanities generally. Thank you.
Okay, kia ora everyone, and thank you Paul and Lydia for a really interesting and challenging paper that for those of us trying to publish and have our work reach the appropriate audiences and have a recognition for the extent to which our work has been often funded publicly, this is a very topical paper. So what I'd like to do is throw the session open for questions, and let's start by, if there's no questions in the chat, so maybe if you've got a question, please raise your hand. Okay, well, I do have a question. Actually, I've got a few because I'm interested. Now, whose hand's next? Oh, Alexis, I'll let you go first.
Sorry, just took me a moment to unmute. No, sorry, I was just, I didn't mean to displace your question there, Paul. I was just asking, I was hoping you might be able to expand a little bit on your comments with regard to green open access. Like, you've described quite a lot of very large potentials in this environment, but in my experience, there isn't a widespread, or as widespread as we might like, take up of some of the green OA options that are available. And I have a sort of feeling that, you know, perhaps if we can eat the elephant one bite at a time, that's a pathway along there that can enable cultural shift in this sector. And I was wondering if you've got any thoughts about how to improve take up of existing openness or existing opportunities for openness in this community.
I might just start and Lydia might follow if that's okay, if that works. Thanks very much for your question. I think part of the barrier which you allude to is just the lack of communication, and we've tried to bring this out in the paper, and it's something that we're really following in our research, speaking to university leaders and stakeholders at different levels. Just the added challenge of communicating these opportunities across institutions where different universities or institutes or libraries or whatever it might be have totally different priorities or at least different communication channels. And so we are at a stage where there's a need for consolidation, as you say, to really sort of drive behaviour down certain avenues, if that is agreed to be profitable or not, or at least open the debate so that can have, you know, those decisions can be made. Within institutions that can often be quite political, financial, it can be to do with hierarchies, and so it's a very imperfect system at the moment. Lydia, do you have a further comment?
I agree. I think it's a very hard system to change until we have a different university ranking system and the ways that universities judge their researchers and help their promotions. And I think, but I hope that with time, as people are more aware of open scholarship and these barriers, will people start wanting to publish in publications which are totally open and have their information on repositories. But as long as universities still judge you according to being in a top-tier journal, it's going to be difficult. It's just a slow process, I think.
Yes, I know at our university there's the tyranny of Scopus, which is inflicted upon all of us, even though we repeatedly argue that this isn't about Scopus is far more suited for science, and then the question arises, how have we managed to become institutions that are beholden to organisations that quantify us for money and make literally millions of us? I actually just wanted to quickly say something about equity, because some years ago I reviewed the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the National University of Samoa, which is a fantastic university, and their library has a real dearth of books and no access to any sort of digital gated repository. And I was talking to one of their senior scholars who said that they couldn't do research if they didn't have access to the university's open research repositories. And that's the sharp end of this. I mean, for a lot of us that are in reasonably well-funded universities, we can still get behind the barriers and we can still get through the gates and we can still pick up access. We still have access to research, but there's a real disparity in terms of particularly developing world access to research that just perpetuates inequity, or it seems to, in my opinion. And if you've got a comment on that.
This is where the discussion really goes into the big global picture of the responsibility that we have as, well, as institutions, I guess, but as individuals, to understand that the flow of data and information and research isn't even and never has been, but it should be in this day and age where we should be able to communicate more openly and freely with parts of the world that don't have the same kind of access. And there are some strategies, I think, in place on, in many ways through different institutions to enable that greater access, but still it makes a great inequity, and different kinds of digital divides have been opening. I think that's the reality of it. The idea of initially not having access to computing, or the internet was a divide, but now we think about the knowledge divide, and it's cutting across different lines. And it is a major problem and a focus in this area. I thank you for raising it.
I think we could keep talking about this for some time, but with a view to the clock and to keeping us moving and ensuring that everything is allocated equitably, I'm going to move on to our next presenter, Chris Houghton, and we may well come back to some of these because Chris, not so much the other side of the fence, but Chris, you work in an area where your business model and developing the Google Scholars Lab, the Gale Scholars Lab, which has been a very strong supporter of digital humanities. You're interested, I guess, both in creating access, but also in how your model works with that. So to introduce Chris, he's the head of digital scholarship for Gale, responsible for Gale's relationship with the global DH community. His primary goal in strengthening this relationship with DH and the wider academic community is to ensure that Gale continues to develop tools, especially the Gale Digital Scholar Lab, that will help them to meet some of the needs in this rapidly evolving educational environment. And sorry, Chris, I think you've joined us at a less salubrious time zone than some of us. So I'll hand over to you and hope that you feel sufficiently fresh to engage us.
I will try my very best, and thank you, Paul, for the welcome, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak. Yeah, it's currently sort of 3:30 in the morning in the middle of winter, well, nearly the middle of winter. Winter seems to have come this weekend, so I'm sort of shivering downstairs at the moment, but that's keeping me awake, which is a very, very good thing. And in today's talk, what I wanted to do was sort of discuss Gail's experiences of working with the DH community to develop tools that can expand the possibilities of DH research and increase its exposure by bringing its techniques and practices to the wider arts, humanities, and social sciences communities. I'll talk about the opportunities to both DH and academia more broadly as I see them, and highlight some of the challenges that we've found in working towards these opportunities. So I suppose quickly I should introduce Gail in case many of you may never have heard of Gail. So here's my sort of 30-second summary. If you do know us, it's probably through things like this, digitized copies of archival material. We work with more than 300 of the world's major research libraries to digitize many of their collections, including this, the first page of the Times newspaper from 1st of January 1785, when it was not even called the Times, when it was the Daily Universal Register. And in 1978, Gail purchased Primary Source Media, a microfilm company which led to our work with primary sources, leading to the development of two of the most popular digital archives in 2002 and 2003 with Echo, which is the 18th century collections online and is essentially a collection of most significant books written in English in the 18th century. Based on a catalogue in the British Library, the English short title catalogue. When it was digitized in 2003, it was the world's biggest digitization project, 33 million pages and 180,000 books. And that was our second digital project. The first one was this one, the Times Digital Archive. And Gail's mission from the start when developing these archives and interfaces has always been about expanding the possibilities for research. Initially, it was as simple as making material available to scholars either via microfilm or digitally, so that a scholar in New Zealand or Australia or China or India or Oman wouldn't have to travel halfway around the world and spend thousands of dollars on research trips to visit physical archives. Which isn't to say that familiarity with physical archives isn't important, far from it, but by opening up the accessibility of these significant and academically important archives and libraries, it meant that millions of scholars and students have been able to work with these materials over the past 20 or 30 years who might not otherwise have been able to. Now, none of this is to ignore the fact that Gail exists to be financially viable. If we can develop archives and platforms that are profitable, it not only keeps us in business, but allows the continued digitizing of material that might otherwise be unavailable to the community, and crucially, to continue to invest in platform development that enhances the material and gives new lenses through which it can be viewed. So in purely software development terms, I suppose we see the building and presenting of primary source material on a scale a bit like this. I've titled this Layers of Discovery because most of the decisions that we make involve giving researchers more or enhanced options to explore content and make discoveries that would be extremely hard or impossible to do in a physical archive, from searching for words within a text to cross-searching multiple archives, to simple analysis like plotting the frequency with which terms occur in an archive, to creating corpora and mining them. But you could just as easily see these developments over the past 20 to 30 years by organizations both academic and commercial as bringing forward the point in one's academic career at which you were able to do these various things. Or to put it another way, technological developments serving to remove barriers to access for scholars around the world. In the early 2000s, when we released Echo, the 18th century collections online, it was greeted warmly by the community, but there were certainly voices arguing that by making most of the significant texts written in English in the 18th century available through a searchable user interface, students and scholars would lose some essential research skills of spending time in a physical archive, working with manuscripts and physical books, and close reading texts. Now, I absolutely have sympathy for this view, and I think for any researcher working with digitized texts, some critical reflection should be attempted about the limitations of the digital and the crucial differences, for example, in materiality between the physical and the digital. It's one reason I was keen to contribute to Stephen Gregg's book, Old Books and Digital Publishing, A History of Echo, because it's so important that scholars understand not just the benefits of digitized archives, but their limitations as well. And what we've seen in the subsequent 20 years is that ECHO, for example, has become a cornerstone of Enlightenment scholarship around the world, featuring as one of the most commonly cited collections in the academic literature. But as importantly, and this is at the heart of my presentation today, it features over and over again in classrooms around the world, forming a key part of undergraduate and postgraduate teaching of subjects from Gothic fiction to imperialism and decolonization. My talk today focuses on expanding the community of practice for digital humanities in a similar way to how digital archives expanded the access to material in the 90s and into the 2000s. And for Gale and Digital Humanities, this is the platform I'll be referring to. Gale Digital Scholar Lab is our cloud-hosted text and data mining research environment, featuring many of Gale's digital archives aligned to open source text mining tools. The lab's been around since late 2018 and gone through several iterations in that time, entirely driven by feedback from scholars and institutions around the world. In fact, we're about to cut over to a new platform that brings in several significant features that have been requested in the past 18 months. Currently, over 100 institutions use the lab. Use cases vary wildly, from some using it solely for research, some using it as the central tool in DH certificates for PhD candidates, some using it on DH courses, and some using it to enhance traditionally taught undergraduate modules. And maybe the first challenge when working to bring digital humanities practice to a non-DH audience centers on these first two bullet points: accessing primary source collections in a research environment that integrates text mining tools. In classes I've taught at undergraduate level, being able to use set text or other material relevant to the module when introducing analytical methods helps to ground them in the practical and move them away from the theoretical. This is incredibly important for a novice audience, as dropping them straight into k-means or LDA or vector space or other methods can lose them quickly, understandably. So although the possibilities of the tools or techniques might be almost endless, it certainly helps to initially focus on concrete use cases to make them relevant and accessible for the student. So to further illustrate the challenge of bringing DH to a wider audience, this is the workflow for the lab. Now, it's a fairly busy slide, but the light blue boxes in the middle are the lab workflow of build, clean, analyze, with the various elements of each of those and where you do them in the lab underneath. So under build, if you want to refine your attributes, you go to the advanced search. If you want to evaluate your results, you go to the results page, and so on and so forth. And at every stage, as you can see at the bottom, any user has the ability to export data or statistical data or visualizations for their own use outside of the lab. So even though obviously you pay for Gale archival data, we've tried to make it as open as possible when it comes to using that data within an institution. And for the first 18 months of the lab's life, this is all it was. But the most common piece of feedback from around the world was people really wanted contextual material to provide a pedagogical scaffold that could help them start using it within their own institutions. Specifically, we needed to provide context around these sections: ideation and interpretation. So this is what we started to build. By first employing an instructional designer in Dr. Lindsay Gervais to design the Learning Centre, and DH specialists in Dr. Sarah Ketchley and Dr. Wendy Perler-Kurtz to develop many of the materials in it, we launched it in the lab in 2019. And this contextualization is absolutely crucial. We wanted to develop material that provided guidance as well as explanation. So for example, in the lab, the underlying algorithm for topic modeling is Mallet. Now, if you're not familiar, Mallet was developed by Andrew McCullum and others at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and is one of the most familiar and well-used tools for LDA topic modeling, which is why we were advised to include it in the lab when we consulted with researchers in the very initial development process. In the Learning Centre for the lab, we not only introduce Mallet and talk about what topic modeling is and how it works, and of course, crucially, link to Mallet so that you can go and see the open source tool in all its glory and obviously critically evaluate it if you need to. But we also try and give advice on why a researcher might want to use it and introduce some use cases for it. Now, this is a big challenge because topic modeling is obviously a really versatile technique with lots of potential applications, which would be impossible to reference in their entirety in a piece of contextual information. So choices have to be made to make the context accessible for us, It's about showing something that a student, for example, could do with a common material type from the Gale archives, like newspapers or monographs, to ground the technique in the available content. I've found another challenge here as well with a non-DH audience. In presenting this process and workflow as an end in and of itself, as well as a means to answering a particular research question. For example, it might be that by using this workflow and iterating within it, it allows a researcher to learn more about a particular subject or uncover material through an analysis of a content set that they might never have found through conventional means, or indeed to completely refine or redesign their research question. And as well as contextualizing the tools, we found it incredibly important, based on all academic feedback, to really focus on the process and contextualize the workflow as well. This is one of the reasons we started commissioning sample projects that would provide a fully end-to-end academic project using the lab, where every step and decision and interpretation was explained. Now, the final section of the Learning Center again comes from multiple user requests. Given our objectives and how many institutions wanted to use the lab to teach DH techniques, we started including sample frameworks for curricular, learning objectives, and project development in the classroom. These can be used in their entirety or as a guide. They're all free, but again, usage analysis suggests that including these within the lab has met a particular need in many institutions. These are based on existing courses, primarily those taught by my colleague, Dr. Sarah Ketchley at the University of Washington. And I'll talk a little bit about the pedagogy that these are built on now. So the foundation of all the classes Sarah teaches is comprehensive planning, which includes developing documents for the team, like the project charter and the project one-pager, considering sustainability and data management issues, copyright, and the scope of work to be done. In class, this takes place over the course of a quarter or 10 weeks, so it's necessarily limited. The middle section is where work with digital tools comes into play, including, but not limited, crucially, to the Gale Digital Scholar Lab. This process builds towards the final project. Characteristically, a project-based learning integrated course incorporates the use of digital tools and research methodologies, invites students to investigate complex topics and phenomena, is inquiry-focused and collaborative, and facilitates key critical thinking and project management skills. This is one of the sample syllabi with an emphasis on the disciplinary topic. In this case, some of the hidden pioneers in Near Eastern archaeology. And the framework comes from the ACRL Digital Humanities special issue in digital literacy, referring to the online class specifically. As you can see, the courses are designed to teach several literacies, including branching, socio-emotional, and photo-visual, all indicated by the icons at the bottom. And these example learning objectives articulate why it's so important for us to focus on project-based learning as a template for using the lab, and highlight some of the key opportunities that I frequently hear from institutions all over the world. Namely, that expanding the teaching of these DH concepts contributes towards key university or departmental objectives, developing digital literacy in their humanities students, promoting interdisciplinarity even at the undergraduate level, and the use of digital tools as a method for enhancing humanities research. A significant opportunity or advantage is how introducing DH methodologies can affect the use of existing digital archives. A review of the 2020 usage of the lab confirmed the suspicion that using this workflow and giving researchers the opportunity to easily apply analytic methods promoted deeper interaction with Gale primary sources. Now, these are the top line metrics for the lab in 2020, but in 2020, users spent about 32.7 minutes per session in the lab, which is nearly 7 times as long on the platform than in a selection of digital archives. I should say at this point that it's a selection of digital archives because the usage system couldn't cope with generating usage for a year for all Gale's archives. So what I did was just take a selection of the top most popular global archives and looked at that usage. And not just this, but users also searched over twice as much in the lab, suggesting that the iterative nature of the workflow was encouraging users to refine searches, perhaps based on the output of their analysis. And we saw an outsized increase in interaction. In 2020, institutions using the lab grew 20% compared with 2019, but content sets created grew by 71%, and documents analysed increased by 134%. And one final piece of analysis of the lab's influence on primary source use. This is a chart of the top 20 content set creators in the lab in 2020 and where they come from geographically, which I think certainly confirms the global interest in digital humanities. But just looking at these top 20 content set creating institutions, these are the year-on-year changes in various metrics in 2020 when compared to 2019 in terms of the archives that those institutions held. So what we can see is a large rise in things like sessions and searches, and a slightly smaller rise in retrievals, although that reflects a change in the way this metric was counted that came in during 2020. And I think contributes to a bit of an undercounting. When I run the same exercise for 2021, I fully expect retrievals to be more in line with sessions and searches. So it seems that mixing more digital humanities methodology into the working practice of a typical academic department encourages more interaction with primary source archives as a consequence. And finally, I want to reference a case study from last December. I worked with lecturers at Newcastle University in the UK to introduce the lab in a second year 18th century literature module entitled Writing New Worlds. In previous years, lecturers had given students keywords that they used to search various set texts. This work would lead towards a graded keyword essay at the end of the module. Last year, for the first time, they used the lab to allow students to use topic modeling, n-grams, or named entity recognition to self-generate their own keywords, in the process exposing them to the fundamentals of building a content set, cleaning it, and analysing it. As you can see, it proved beneficial for the department, and feedback from the course was excellent. Now, one of the lessons learned was that it was crucial to be as specific as possible, focusing on set texts with which the students were already familiar. By providing pre-work and detailed instructions, all participants came to the workshop with some semblance of a project created that could then be discussed rather than building in the classroom, as it was felt that conducting live project building over Zoom with the group might be too complicated. Although I have taught the lab in person in workshops, and we have been able to sort of build projects live in the workshop and discuss them there, which is a really useful way of going about things. At Gale, researchers have been using ECHO, or our historical newspapers, in digital humanities research for decades. For me, by far the most exciting opportunity is the ability to apply digital humanities methodologies to areas that haven't typically benefited from it, whether that's mining collections of newly digitized women's writing, which appears in the latest installment of the Women's Studies Archive. It could be topic modelling in archives like the Australian Queer Archives, or South Africa's Gay and Lesbian Memory in Action in Archives of Sexuality and Gender, or potentially establishing networks of far-right actors in political extremism and radicalism to teach us more about how extremist groups operate. It's certain that welcoming new disciplines and users into digital humanities can only make it richer and more rewarding. And with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'd love to take questions.
Well, Chris, given the time of day that you're dealing with, that was a stellar performance. Very well done. And I'm just having a look to see, does anyone have a question? Any hands going up? Something that people would like to ask Chris? I do have one, and it's about collaboration, and maybe I could give you an example. The University of Canterbury Library, believe it or not, has the largest collection of papers in the world related to the Taukaea war crimes trials. The New Zealand judge deposited his entire set of papers, and the only equivalent collection, I think, is the Boatwright Library in the US. And it's always interested me the extent to which we might as institutions be able to collaborate in doing comparative analysis of those archives. I just wondered, I mean, the archives that you have are amazing, but what are the issues for you? Were someone to approach you and say, I've got an archive of far right papers and I'm wondering if we can collaborate on analysis and maybe produce, but we're a not-for-profit and you're a for-profit. Is that an issue?
I mean, not really. I mean, fortunately, I'm not on the publishing side, so I'm not the kind of person who commissions these kind of archives. But I mean, plenty of the archives. You know, for example, like I mean, to give you a sort of an analog to this, the archives of the Wiener Library, the sort of foremost Holocaust library, based now in Tel Aviv. You know, we have some of the collections from there where we've kind of worked together to digitize their material. I mean, there's obviously a sort of commercial relationship that goes on between the archive and us, and it involves you know, often paying royalties or whatever it might be. I think we'd certainly, in terms of something like this, be interested in talking, even if it wasn't about making an archive, to see what we might be able to do to make important things like this more available, or at the very least provide, you know, some of our expertise in terms of building an archive and building a platform that can get these kind of things out into the world, which is, you know, presumably where they should be. So yeah, not a very good answer, I'm afraid, because it's not really my area of expertise, but it's certainly something I think we'd love to talk about.
I was just mulling over the keynote panel we had on Indigenous data sovereignty, and one of the comments in there was that, you know, Indigenous data and Indigenous narratives and Indigenous documents belong to Indigenous people. Is that something that Gail has a policy around when it comes to, you know, what sort of things, how do we consult, what would our relationship with First Nations people be, for example?
I don't know necessarily that we do, simply because it's usually around sort of working with I mean, I don't know what kind of form this kind of data takes and where it's housed at the moment. I think, you know, usually we're working with kind of an established archive to hopefully preserve, sometimes to allow them to sort of take physical copies off kind of shelves and preserve them and make them available. I mean, we've had all sorts, because I mean, I don't know if I mentioned, but we've got, you know, over 300 source library partners, from, you know, the British Library and Buckingham Palace to like, as I said, the Australian Queer Archives and sort of much smaller niche archives and things like that. So our agreements with them, I think, are probably as varied as archives. And if there was something where it was a case of, you know, things had to be available, you know, for free to a certain community, I think that's something that we've done in the past. I know we've got collections of kind of Native American material and things like that. So, you know, I think our guiding principle is to try and be as sensitive as possible to the collections while sort of making them as available as possible.
See, Paul Arthur's got his hand up, so I'll hand over to him.
Sorry, Paul, I think you're on mute.
That old chestnut, yeah. Thanks very much, Chris. And it was just absolutely fascinating to hear about that latest work and to know that you're working in this space for Gail. I was just reflecting, and maybe more of a comment and a historical note, that Gail has been a supporter of digital humanities research through its conferences and support and sponsorship of those events, but also through digitisation and making available of collections for, you know, some time. And the first time that I was made aware of it was when I was convening the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organisations conference in Sydney in 2015. And for the first time, the conference had what was seen as a commercial sponsor. And I wanted to just sort of raise that because it links, it speaks of a bringing together of what I was talking about and Lydia and I were talking about in our paper about open scholarship and stakeholder relations and collaboration. So Gail has been, a supporter in many ways, and we can see now through the various tools and collections that have been made available what value that is being provided. And of course, there are always cost concerns, and this is part of a negotiation. And some of the answers that you've provided offer this, opening to think, well, how can we work in new ways with different collections, with commercial considerations in mind, also open scholarship principles underpinning it, and for the the good of the research community. And I don't think there are easy answers to all of those negotiations, but I did want to sort of note that at that time, for the first time in 2015, the aaDH conference was sponsored by Gail. And I understand over time that you've been a friend of this field, and it's only been expanding through the collections and opportunities that you note, even though there are concerns about that relationship between the commercial, university, open, other actors in the space. I think it's important just to open that dialogue, and you continue to do that, and this session is doing that. So thank you.
Yes, and I recall the Gail presence at the Utrecht conference, and the fact that Gail has been a DH partner sort of for some years now. And I think one of the strengths of that relationship is that Gail listens and responds. So although we can, at times say, where does profit sit in this, there is also an ongoing conversation, and it's a two-way one, which I think is positive, and that's why I was very pleased that you offered to give a paper here, Chris, and as you said in your your note to me, you'd relish a bit of pushback. So I think this is a good debate to have.
Completely, and may I just say, I mean, my thing is the Digital Scholar Lab, which is essentially content free and is a thing that sort of sits on top. That wouldn't be possible without enormous amounts of input from scholars, students, academics, librarians around the world. I mean, it's from a rather tortured sort of birthing period of kind of alpha and beta testing of about 2.5 years. To where it is now, which is sort of quite a successful thing. I mean, it's everything that's gone into it has been driven by scholars and the community, and that's been a real sort of privilege to try and be a conduit for, I think.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm pleased to say that we're perfectly on time as far as this session goes, and we've got 27 minutes for Alexis, which balances out pretty well with everybody else. So we'll move on and welcome Alexis Tindall. She's the University of Adelaide Library's Manager of Digital Innovations since April 2020. It's a role in which she's trying to improve the library support for researchers who are interested in conducting data-enabled humanities and related research through a mix of programming, direct support, strategic communication, and improved processes. And her paper is titled Multiple Handholds, a Stronger Web, Working Across Communities in an Uncertain Environment to Strengthen DH Support at the University of Adelaide Library. So thank you, Alexis, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Paul. And gosh, that's a long title. Just in opening, I'd just like to mention that I'm joining today from the lands of the Kaurna people, and I'd like to ensure that I pay my respect to their ongoing custodianship and relationship with the lands. So I, as Paul mentioned, I started working at the University of Adelaide Library in mid-2020 as the Manager of Digital Innovation, with this role to look at how we were supporting humanities, arts and social sciences researchers who were using data and digital tools. We're 1.5 years down the track, and I wanted to share how this has unfolded, particularly given the conference theme we have here, looking at how this program, considering some of the strength that this program has found in the community and the colleagues around us. This was an appointment with limited resources and a position without precedent. It was something new that we were going to do. And so building connections with handholds, anchor points with the communities around us has helped expand the capacity and the impact of this program. This was an experimental initiative for the library. I had 2 years to prove that it could be useful. And the resource that we were dealing with was essentially me, the library, the regular library resources that we had, and the time and input that I could wrangle out of my colleagues and collaborators. How do we get to this point? Well, some of you may have been at a 2016 conference, 2016 DHA conference, where the University of Wollongong's Claire McKenzie and Kerry Ross presented on a survey of our sector's approach to how we support digital humanities. And it showed a range of library-led or faculty-initiated input efforts, including e-research librarians, labs, makerspaces, and similar. In their results, Ross and McKenzie point out that respondents identified a traditional library service model in the way that they engage with DH activities, either with skills such as metadata support or providing access to collections, and refer to initiatives like institutional repositories and bibliographic management tools. Around the same time, after consultation with our student research community, the University of Adelaide Library produced the Library of the Future report, which also asserted the digital disruption to academic libraries' core services, looking at our role in providing digital resources, improving students and our research community's digital skills and digital literacies, and considering how we publish and care for digital research output. So that was like 2016. In the intervening years, that sort of work has essentially become business as usual for our academic liaison team. We support researchers across the board with bibliographic management tools, research data management advice, and publication discoverability of e-resources, and all this sort of thing. So when it came to appointing me in 2020, I needed to do something different in this new role. So rather than just supporting digital research, I needed to carve out a space to identify digital humanities opportunities, build up the community on campus, and up our game in the digital research skills department. I think it should be noted that we are not a university that has a large cohort of self-identified digital humanities researchers. In recent years, we have established a digital humanities program under the supervision of my good friend Aaron Humphrey, who's also appearing on this program. But this is a field that we're getting our feet in. So I didn't walk into having an established academic community to support. I had no budget to work with. And I was essentially appointed for my community engagement skills rather than my technical skills. So what could we do? I'm just going to share my screen because we did have a community consultation a few months into the program. And at that, oh, hang on, can't see myself. Yeah, and so in that community consultation, the participants workshopped a range of priorities, including data, making it available and making it useful. There was a high interest in data sets being available for teaching applications, as well as drawing out research relevant data from our special and archival collections. People very much liked the idea of a digital humanities lab. They saw this as being essentially, well, as well as wanting it as a drop-in facility and access to equipment, the participants were particularly keen on an exhibition space. They were keen to showcase creative work and were calling out for opportunities to communicate their research, including to the general public. They spoke about wanting to see digital research in action. They were keen on networking, anything that could support cross-disciplinary collaboration, especially where it involved accessing diverse skills in our community, and talked about building a community of practice on campus. And they were interested in supporting students. They wanted to see this as a space for training and skill building opportunities for students that would bring students into contact with experts. How to act on these ideas without resources. I massaged them a bit into a set of priorities that could guide my programming. So I basically tried to look at what we could do under and assess it, whether it would be something that could showcase digitally innovative research at our uni, especially from humanities or related fields, encourage or inspire digitally innovative research projects, help build a community of practice, and connect these researchers with relevant support at the university that was already in place. The only way forward was to look and draw on the communities around me and make use of these existing resources. Connecting with communities has had the dual benefit of bringing talent and expertise into my program and cultivated growing awareness of what I, the library, and our digital humanities and arts researchers were doing in this area. So I'd just like to showcase 4 handholds that have been fundamental to achieving the impact that we've had. So first, looking at existing digital activities in relevant disciplines. As I mentioned, I didn't arrive, this wasn't a university where we have an active digital humanities research group. And locally, we actually harbour a bit of a self-perception that we aren't very digital, which actually isn't really true. Our humanities and arts researchers also sometimes struggle to get attention across the university for their research. And as I mentioned, there was a really, really high interest in exhibition and showcase opportunities. On that perceptions of our digitalness or not, I'm cool with that. I'm very familiar with a community reluctance to sort of self-identify as a digital humanities person. And I actually believe that I could have stronger impact, establishing a stronger handhold, if you will, by supporting people who are using data and digital tools in any part of their research, in discovery, analysis, or sharing their research outputs. It became more useful to talk about communities of researchers in humanities and arts who are using data and digital tools than using the words digital humanities. I've run a DH Lab webinar series over the last year, showcasing a range of our own speakers, doing everything from digital mapping to text analysis to network analysis and crowdsourcing. And through this program, I wanted to shift perceptions of what digital research looked like and open our community's eyes to new opportunities. I wanted people to see digital research as achievable and being done by the people who are around them, and to think about how emerging tools and methods could complement their existing research, rather than thinking they needed to go full bore and adopt a digital humanities method and approach. An important part of delivering that was the connection that I have with the Australian and local DH community. A researcher working in a university in 2021 is very time poor. Workload and performance pressures in normal times are ridiculous, let alone in the unpredictable circumstances we've had over the last 2 years. So time for research is squeezed from every angle. So attending something like an information session, a lab webinar, training, or even reading an article that I produce online becomes a trade-off. Is this worth my time? This makes working in research support really tricky. It's really important for me to make sure the time I ask of my researcher colleagues is well spent. I have to help them know that if they choose to come and attend one of our events, that it isn't unfairly taking from some other part of their work. In the DH Lab programming and the development of our online support, I aimed to link information with real research outcomes. So as such, I've looked outwards into our national and local community to showcase different approaches. So instead of offering information sessions that say, look at this wonderful source or wonderful resource that the library is providing to you, the message of our communications was, look at what this researcher, one of your peers, is doing with this source of data or this source of information. I wanted to show links to real research outcomes and real efficiencies or expansions in what we're able to do, not just the potential of such. It's very difficult to get the space to talk about those things. As such, each of our webinars in our DH Lab series included a speaker from outside our university. So we brought in presentations on social media analysis from an ANU PhD student, theatre and performance studies out of UNSW, and speakers from digital research infrastructure initiatives around the place as well. I've produced online case studies showcasing the work of Kath Bode and Michelle Whitelaw, whose work will be known to many of you, and some of you who are in the audience have been helpful in helping me find these case studies and speakers, and I value this network for that. The third handhold, looking at existing university and library resources and raising their profile or translating their relevance. Earlier in the presentation, I suggested that support for digital research had shifted into business as usual for our library's academic liaison team. I don't want you to think we've got this all sorted. It's an incomplete project. And so while things like research data management and open access publishing advice have become a core part of our business, the take-up of this has been patchy, unevenly spread, and is largely dependent on disciplinary norms. As a result, support has drifted towards those disciplines that see opportunities as a natural part of their work. With the patchy adoption of digital technologies across our humanities and arts communities, this hasn't broadly been the case. Similarly, our university is a member of Intersect, which is a nationwide network of e-research analysts who complement cloud storage, cloud computing and storage facilities with short courses in digital research techniques. Our analyst hosts regular hacky hours, drop-in sessions to get advice on digital research challenges. So while our library support and her programs are listed in staff newsletters, our library service catalogue, these communications don't necessarily leap out as a natural part of our humanities and arts colleagues' landscapes. So these initiatives could happily spend all of their time turning biologists into bioinformaticians, but I tried to increase the reach of these services into the humanities and arts community. So this resulted in having humanities and arts specific hacky hours, the e-research analyst has appreciated input from that community into setting her programming plans for the year. And the other one is digital activities in non-humanities disciplines. Like many other universities, the University of Adelaide has responded to increasing demand from students for data science opportunities. We teach introductions to data analysis in the Faculty of Sciences, data science basics in the School of Maths and Computer Science. And in addition to this, our researchers and teaching staff in mathematics in particular tell me anecdotally that because of the perceived career opportunities in AI and machine learning, there's an explosion of interest from students in natural language processing, text and sentiment analysis. So I've actually showcased research projects from maths and physics as part of the DH Lab webinar series. Speakers have talked about refining sentiment analysis approaches using digitised letters from the State Library of New South Wales, about quantitative analysis of Marvel superhero movies as a demonstration of measuring entropy for the purposes of measuring predictability, and using social network analysis to theorise assertions about particle interactions in the Large Hadron Collider. I've done this for a couple of reasons. One, as I mentioned, we want to talk about real research outcomes as part of this project, and these were the things that I had available to me, but also because I'm a true believer in the potential of cross-disciplinary collaboration for future research outcomes. Now, these researchers are using text, historical sources, cultural artefacts. If you squint and tip your head on the side, are they sort of doing digital humanities research? I'm not saying that they are. These projects and research questions have their origins in a different disciplinary environment. Do they have a place in a DH Lab webinar series? Absolutely, I think they do. Remembering my priorities, which was showcasing digitally innovative research in our own community and encouragement and inspiration, I think that they've got a place there. So this is a two-way street. I'm not bringing in any mathematician with expertise in network analysis who thinks they're better than any humanities researcher and knows it all and that the humanities just need to learn from them. These are people who've been excited by this opportunity for collaboration and have, without exception, expressed positive experiences by what they've learned from their co-presenters. So that's just a selection of the anchor points across our community to which I have tethered our program, and hopefully in doing so increase its longevity and reach. I really appreciate the input of the community around me, and I hope that they've received equivalent benefit from this engagement. I don't want you to think we've got all the answers, so I'm going to finish off with a couple of comments about what we haven't worked out and what I think success looks like. The big one that I struggle with is expectation management and resources. I am not a technical support person, either by skills or capacity. My university does not provide technical support in the way that some colleagues would like. We don't have the resources. So that turns me occasionally into a snake oil salesperson. I walk around, check out this, look at this amazing thing you might be able to do. Oh, how are you going to do that? Well, look, I can point you in the right direction to empower yourself, but I can't actually do that work for you. I'm trying to combat that by strengthening peer relationships, cross-disciplinary communication and collaboration. But again, these are things that are limited by the workload pressures that our research community is under. The stakeholder community, as I mentioned, is time poor and overloaded with information. How do I get their attention to something that I think is really useful? People don't read university newsletters. Email has become a burden more than a help. I don't know the answer here, but I'm hoping that persistence is key to it. And I do see some building momentum by our program. And the other one is building community in COVID times. It's not just COVID, it's the changing nature of campus life. It's the scarcity of time again. In early consultations, many people in the group consultation and individuals asked for unstructured networking opportunities. In response to this, I built informals into our program, but these less structured events had a terrible response. Zoom is really great for connecting us, and something like this conference wouldn't be able to happen without it. But I actually personally think it's not actually that good at building community, and I don't know what to do on this front. And finally, what does success look like? This is actually really hard because in a way my success would be measured by other people having further success in their work. But hopefully I'm able to make a small contribution there. Personally, I want to keep building a growing library of discoverable and digestible online resources so that self-guided, interested parties can find what they need when they need it. And I think also partly what I do with programming and things like is to bring people out of the woodwork who want to use a digital method or tool. So I think if we got more inquiries and more consultations, that's a sign that people are becoming more brave to dip their toe in these waters. And finally, I'd really like to improve communication across silos. As I mentioned, huge believer in cross-disciplinary collaboration as an opportunity for the future. I don't have the hubris to say that I would be the person that can facilitate that, but if I can tip my oar in the water and help us move towards a future where there's improved communication across university silos, I would absolutely love that. So I think I'm going to wind up there because I reckon I'm out of time, but I'll stop sharing and very happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thanks, Alexis. No, you timed that perfectly, and we've still got 10 minutes of our session to go. And thanks to Roland Mosbergen, who has given us a question in chat, and it is, would your techniques and approaches work at a national or an international scale?
Oh, look, Roland, that's a really good question, and I am really lucky that in my current job, that's not my job. I'm skeptical, although on one hand, I'd like to say that we are working at a national scale. I mean, I've had lovely involvement in the program from people at UNSW and ANU, and it's only through connecting with a community like aaDH and participating in forums like this that I've been able to bring that talent into and share it with my University of Adelaide community. I think maybe the only thing I can suggest about things working at a national or international scale is a recognition that we're all inching us forward in our own different ways, and where we can find alignment and interoperability between our measures, whether that's interoperability of actual data or tools or interoperability of people and their objectives, then that's how we can perhaps work together. So is my answer no? Maybe it is, I think.
Other questions? I see any hands go up, but Alexis, I think probably a few people like me smiled and nodded in understanding and agreement when you were talking about some of the challenges that you're facing. DH at the University of Canterbury grew out of a very human response to try and understand the earthquakes we'd experienced and collect images, stories and media about that event. And what I learned out of that is that nothing's wasted. Any conversation, any approach, any viewpoint, it often comes back and it rewards you. And one of the first people to really support our earthquake archive was one of our leading computer scientists. And conversations across the campus opened up, and I think you're doing exactly the right thing. You're talking to people. One of the things we're good at as DHs is that we can do a lot with a little, and so sometimes because we can, we don't always seek collaborators. And if I can just share with you something that's very exciting for us here at UC is that our SEISMIC, the Canterbury Earthquake Digital Archive, is about to partner with the government-funded Quake Core Centre for Research Excellence, which in its new iteration has realised that it needed to understand more about social impact and collect social data. And so all of a sudden, a DH project is going to become a repository associated with a national centre for research excellence, and a lot of that has just been about persistence and keeping conversations open. So from my point of view, you're doing exactly what needs to happen, and that's often where things grow from.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's really important. We are doing having the patience to keep looking at things. I had a really lovely experience with a music researcher, actually soundscape researcher, who, when I arrived, went, oh, fabulous, there's someone doing digital humanities. I'm going to do this ambient recording over a long period of time in a physical space, but I don't want to listen to 7,000 hours of recording in order to annotate it or that kind of thing. Can I get someone to use AI to do that? And so he didn't have the skills to be able to, or the experience to be able to describe the technical challenge that he was looking for. But through the various relationships that we built, that I sort of brought to this situation was we managed to sort of connect with someone from the Faculty of Sciences who was organising a cross-disciplinary data analysis group. We managed to talk to someone in computer science who was looking at projects for their PhD students. And to be honest, neither of those led directly to an outcome. But as someone who is not teaching, who just is not researching and has some time on my hands, I was able to keep sort of plugging away at this. And actually, after some time, one of the people we'd made contact with in the Faculty of Sciences says, I have these couple of students who are doing an AI startup. They're looking for a project. They have a bit more time on their hands, so they don't need to be paid as a PhD scholarship or a postdoc. And now those people are now talking to each other about perhaps working on that project together. So yeah, none of these conversations are wasted, but sometimes it takes a bit of persistence, and I'm in the lucky position to be able to help by having some time to have that persistence.
Great.
We've got
one more question from Alexander. So shall we make this our final question? And riffing off some of Prof. Kukatai's comments earlier, might it be the local specific and relational work that you're doing that is the thing, rather than developing a program with a need to scale up across institutions or federate nationally? What a great question.
Yeah, I like that. And look, the other thing is, I like to talk about what we're doing, because I think that you know, sometimes people don't think their research or their project is big enough or important enough or technical enough to, say, feature in a forum like this or whatever. But I think that these are the communities where we sort of riff off of each other, where we all, you know, inch forward a little bit, have an idea. And so having that sort of local and specific opportunities to look at a project, it might even be small scale. One of the projects that I love to hear about is Aaron Humphrey does this project in one of his courses, crowdsourcing data out of old Phantom comics, and then using that to help students understand that way of looking at a text from a sort of quantitative perspective as well. And you know, this is an in-class project that happens in one session. So, but surfacing that in these sorts of environments helps us all think differently and learn that these things are very achievable. So, Katrina, you're right. There's the need for specific IT support. So Katrina's asked, lots of researchers still think they need specific IT support for DH, but we make an argument that facilitation and project development support is more important. We're never going to have, you know, groups of data analysts. I mean, some people are lucky to have an e-research facility. Some people are lucky to have an informatics hub. Generally, these things, they have to be funded. The continuity of those things is always under question. So we just have to be creative about how to bring those skills together in our community.
Absolutely. All right, let's end on a note of creativity. I'm always in favour of that. And can I just encourage everyone at 6 p.m. New Zealand time, so in just over half an hour, we've got our first social event. We've called it a newcomers welcome, but actually it's an all-comers welcome. It's a chance for us to get together and get to know each other a little bit and a bit better and have a chat about where we're at and what we think about DH and where we'd like to see it going. So please be encouraged to come to the newcomers welcome and participate, get to know someone you don't, talk about your projects and see if you can't, you know, develop some new collaborations. Yes, absolutely. Ngā mihi nui, great presentations. Thank you all and look forward to seeing you all soon.